Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 9th, 2026. Today we're going to talk about the Pacific because things are really about to get active there. The tropical Atlantic right now remains quiet, as to be expected in an El Nino year. Things look really barren there, and I'll obviously show you the models to show what's currently happening in the Atlantic. And again, there's nothing. But on the other hand, and we've talked about this, and I've said that this was going to happen, and it was inevitable that as El Nino continues to strengthen, eventually the Pacific would really start to get active, and it's looking like that time is coming up, starting in just a matter of a few days. So we're going to go over everything that is to be expected and what exactly the tropics will have implications on, especially when it comes to land, since obviously, there are land masses to be concerned with when we're talking about the tropics. So we're going to go over everything. With that being said, let's get started straight away. First off, taking a look at what is happening in the globe right now. And you can see definitely activity already beginning to spark up here. And the Westpac already started getting active earlier on in the month as they had Typhoon Bavi. And this became a very, very strong storm, became a classic long-track, strong typhoon. And I'm pretty sure that behind Bavi, there's probably a few more areas that are beginning to spark up in the Westpac as well. So in the Western Pacific, things have already gotten started. And Bavi here, a typhoon, luckily much weaker now than it was before. So it's going to be an impactful storm, especially for Taiwan and China, but much less of a storm than before. But already here, further to the east in the Central Pacific and in the Eastern Pacific probably very soon as well, but at least in the Central Pacific right now, Invest Area 90C. The Central Pacific does have their own designation for invests. The Eastern Pacific is E, and I'm pretty sure you know the Atlantic is L, and obviously the Western Pacific is W, but for the Central Pacific, the invest designation is C. And this is the first invest that is formed within the Central Pacific this year. And looking at the chances, going to the National Hurricane Center here, we take ourselves all the way to the Eastern Pacific. I believe this is where Invest 90C is. It has a moderate chance of development, according to the National Hurricane Center. And besides that, there are also two other areas of interest here in the Eastern Pacific. So 3 total areas that we are watching right now in the Eastern Pacific. So definitely a sign of things starting to become very, very active. Meanwhile, on the other hand, in the Atlantic, though, not so much. Things are right now expected to stay quiet for the next 7 days, and still absolutely no sign of activity to come in the near future in the Atlantic. And taking a look at the satellite image of the Atlantic right now, you can see very much as to why. First off, in the deep tropics, especially in the eastern Atlantic here, there's literally pretty much not even a single speck of convection in sight. Certainly not any deep convection whatsoever. And this is, again, a part of the general atmospheric, feedback loop of lots of rising motion. And you'll really see that rising motion in full display here when I show you the Eastern Pacific satellite picture in just a little bit. But if you just generally look at the Eastern Atlantic here, everything just looks stable. I mean, you could clearly see that there's a lot of dry air, and it'll probably become much more prominent as well with the Saharan air if I, flip to the visible satellite shot. But it's just dry. There's absolutely, it looks like there's a cap here that is really preventing any sort of instability and convection in the atmosphere. And so that is pretty much just keeping a lid on things in the Atlantic. And this is, again, expected for the kind of year that this year is going to be, with a lot of sinking air naturally in the Atlantic, as we have a very strong El Nino building. And we're definitely probably not going to be looking to the Eastern Atlantic for much tropical development. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3, weak tropical storms, maybe a hurricane in the Eastern Atlantic or so that goes out to sea, but nothing significant will come, and this entire tropics region is going to be shut down, and obviously that's going to affect the rest of the basin. So, as I said before, where we're probably going to have to turn our attention to this year for development in the Atlantic will be closer to home, and I bring that up because there looks like there's honestly interesting-ish area here of convection in the Western Gulf. The Gulf in general, sea surface temperature anomaly-wise and sea surface temperature-wise as a whole, is very, very warm. So maybe if something is able to get into the Gulf and conditions are favorable atmospherically, we might see some development there. But at least in the tropics right now, things are very, very quiet compared to how things look like in the Eastern Pacific, which is the exact opposite. Lots of convective activity right now, and you can definitely see just the general balance of how things are setting up this year. And you can definitely tell that there's a lot more rising motion in the Pacific just by the mere fact that we have so much convective activity right now, just generally scattered out throughout the Pacific. That definitely shows you that the atmosphere is much more unstable and much more boiling. And this is definitely going to result in tropical activity here over the next several weeks, and probably a lot of it, as I'll show you with the models in just a little bit. And obviously the National Hurricane Center too, monitoring multiple areas as well. So the Eastern Pacific in general just looks much more fired up and ready to go right now. And taking a look at the velocity potential, which is the MJO, and this gives us a good idea of whether or not we have rising motion or not in the atmosphere. And you could see in the Eastern Pacific right now, and over the past few weeks, we had rising motion set up quite decently in the Eastern Pacific and in the Central Pacific as well. And in fact, we're going to see another phase of it strengthen here over the next few weeks as we head into mid-July. And then beyond that, as we look towards late July into August, we have a persistent cell, almost a standing wave, as you could call it, of rising motion that pretty much stalls here in the Eastern and Central Pacific, and that is a natural response related to El Nino, which is something that is continuing to strengthen right now, and it's only going to get stronger from here on out. And this is just going to help favor the atmosphere quite a bit and continue a lot of that unstable air in the atmosphere in the Pacific. And this is not just the European, because this is the European forecast here for the velocity potential, but take a look at the CFS weekly too, and this really also gives you a visual of how it looks like on a global stage. And first of all, right off the bat here, week one, since it's the CFS weekly forecast, first week, which extends from now till July 16th, look at all of the green that you see here set up in the Eastern Pacific. Lots of rising motion there. Definitely going to help continue all the convective activity we have now. And just within the next week alone here, we will probably get quite a bit in the way of tropical development, but it persists. Week two, loosens up a little bit, but it's still very prominent. And in general, throughout the entire Pacific, lots of rising motion remains. Week three strengthens again. Week four, week five, and all the way up till week six, which takes us out till late August. The rising cell here just persists, and it keeps on going. And that's a classic sign of a maturing El Nino. This is probably the most classic El Nino profile you will get when it comes to the velocity potential. And then on the other hand, in the Atlantic, you see here all these oranges and browns, and that represents sinking air. So just generally goes to show the natural response that we see in an El Nino, rising motion in the Pacific and sinking air in the Atlantic. And of course, we are already seeing that dynamic happen right now. And because of that, just within the next week here alone, here's the European ensembles. Then this only goes out to the next 6 to 7 days. And especially once the 12Z comes out and goes out to the next 2 weeks, you'll probably see even more activity here. But already, in just the next week or so, what seems to me to be at least one signal here in the Central Pacific, probably another one here in the Eastern Pacific entering the Central Pacific, and then there's another one here that gets going closer to the Eastern Pacific, closer to the southwestern coast of Mexico. So you could say at least 3 signals that are appearing here for tropical activity on the European ensembles. And so at least maybe 2 or 3 named storms coming up here in the next few weeks in the Pacific. Not just taking a look at the ensembles, but let's show you the actual operational model as well. Taking it out here to the next week, and already within the next 4 to 5 days, Something gets going here in the eastern central Pacific, and believe that's a part of this area of interest here. Or actually, maybe not. Maybe it's a little bit further to the west here. Maybe that'll be another area that the National Hurricane Center mentions. But signal popping up here, vorticity that consolidates, and that's definitely a tropical system that is developing within the next 3 days, maybe. So already might get our first storm here very soon. And then another one here pops up closer to Mexico. And the GFS actually becomes very aggressive with this. So maybe within the next week, we might already get our first hurricane here in the Pacific. And then it continues, and even going out beyond 7 days and even going into the 10-day range, already yet another signal popping up here in the Eastern Pacific. And that's just the Eastern Pacific alone. There are even more signals here that show up in the Central Pacific. Already one area here, another signal that tries to get going, and then there's even another one here as well. So in general, across the Eastern and Central Pacific over the next week or so, we might be talking about at least 3 to maybe even 4 named storms popping up. So the tropics here in the Pacific are absolutely beginning to fire up. And let's look at the European model as well. I have it on the 0Z run, so this takes us out fully to the next 2 weeks. And you can see as well, the European is also quite aggressive on development. There's one signal over there that tries to get going, and then another one here too. Not as strong as what the GFS shows, but maybe the Euro is underdoing intensity, and then there's yet another signal here that gets going and also becomes stronger in the long range as well, and then maybe there's something else here brewing beyond that. So a string of activity here setting up, a hurricane train, as you will. Looks like it is beginning to set up in the Pacific, and things are really starting to get fired up, and it makes sense with the MJO setting up, and we have a rising motion standing wave stalling in the Pacific as this El Nino continues to get stronger and stronger. It was only a matter of time before the tropics were going to begin to produce, and I'm going to tell you, once the tropics really start getting going here in the Eastern Pacific, it is probably going to be non-stop production of systems for probably the next few weeks. So things are really about to get active here. And then to close out, in the meanwhile, in the Atlantic, totally the opposite story. Nothing happening in the Atlantic right now. Maybe 1 or 2 storms. Maybe there's something that tries to get going here. A piece of energy associated with the front, or some sort of frontal system that moves on off into the western and central Atlantic here. And obviously, as I said before, we'll have to watch off the southeast coast, or maybe a piece of energy that ends up in the Gulf. But that doesn't really be looking like that'll be the case, at least within the next week. So at least within the next week in the Atlantic, things remain very quiet and probably completely shut down. So the Pacific will be our focus here over the next several weeks as things start to get active. And obviously, as things will get active, those in Hawaii and also closer to Mexico as well should obviously keep a close eye out on the tropics. Looks like there's nothing immediate in terms of impacts just yet, but we're going to be seeing quite a bit of activity here brewing up over the next few weeks in the Pacific. So it's only a matter of time before something begins to aim at some sort of landmass. So we will definitely be keeping a close eye out on things here in the tropics over the next few weeks. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for today's discussion. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, and you want more, as I always say every single video, I would really appreciate if you like the video, comment any questions or thoughts you have below, and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you can get videos the moment I upload them. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all of you out there. I'll be back with more tomorrow.